The cry cut through the sterile silence of the hospital corridor, a sound Daniel never expected to hear. His pulse raced as a nurse whispered, "It's your child." Daniel said, "That's impossible, she never told me." The words echoed in his skull like thunder. The overhead lights flickered, throwing his reflection against the polished floor, broken and double. He stumbled into the room, seeing the infant swaddled in white, its tiny fists trembling as though demanding answers. The world narrowed to the fragile breaths before him, and denial strangled his voice. "This isn't real," Daniel muttered, gripping the doorframe. Yet the nurse's eyes held no doubt, only pity that pierced deeper than truth itself. His girlfriend had vanished months ago, leaving no trace but this secret. Now the walls pressed close, the air heavy with cries, and Daniel felt his life shatter into 1,000 sharp fragments. Daniel staggered backward, words clawing his throat, as disbelief tangled with dread. "No, she left me," he muttered, trying to rebuild a world already burned. The nurse's eyes did not waver, as if truth itself was nailed to the floor. His hands trembled, reaching out but retreating before touching the bassinet. Each breath from the infant was a hammer blow, nailing responsibility into his skin. The sterile smell of disinfectant felt suffocating, masking the scent of life he was not ready to face. Daniel's mind replayed the last fight with her, the slammed door, the silence that followed. Now the silence was shattered by a cry that bore his blood. "This can't be mine," he whispered, though the weight of denial grew heavier. The walls seemed to lean closer, as if pressing him into confession, forcing him to see what had been hidden. He closed his eyes, but the sound followed him, a fragile wail wrapping chains around his chest. Memories spilled like broken glass, her absence, her secrets, her final glance before vanishing. Daniel said, "She never told me," his voice shaking. Every detail of betrayal came alive in his mind, yet the proof lay before him, in swaddled innocence. The infant's cry rose higher, pulling him into a storm he could not escape. He felt the courtroom walls already around him, imagined voices accusing, demanding. He muttered, "I'm not ready." His pulse thundered against his ribs, each beat screaming denial. Still, beneath the fear, a strange pull stirred, a thread of belonging that frightened him more than rejection ever had. Daniel pressed his palms against his face, yet the sound pierced through, merciless, impossible to silence. The nurse adjusted the infant, her movements calm, almost ritualistic. Daniel's gaze locked onto the child's tiny chest rising and falling, fragile yet undeniable. "Why didn't she tell me?" he said, voice breaking. The nurse replied gently, "She wanted to protect you." The words slammed into him, leaving him gasping. Protect him from what? From truth? From responsibility? Every heartbeat hammered with questions. His chest felt heavy, as though the hospital ceiling pressed down upon him. He staggered closer, each step louder than the last. The infant stirred again, eyes fluttering for the first time, and Daniel froze. In those eyes he saw an echo of himself, a reflection that left no room for denial. He whispered, "She looks like me," and the air cracked under the weight of recognition. His body trembled, unable to carry both rage and wonder. The moment stretched until time fractured. Daniel stood over the bassinet, fear and recognition battling in his chest. "She chained me to a secret," he whispered, voice raw. His legs weakened, and he dropped into the chair beside the bed, elbows on knees, head heavy in his hands. The nurse turned quietly, her footsteps fading like shadows down the corridor. Silence closed in, broken only by the infant's small breaths. Daniel raised his head, tears streaking his cheeks, and for the first time, he did not look away. Every scar from his past seemed to surface in that fragile presence. "I don't know how," he murmured, "but I can't walk away." The air felt charged, as though the hospital walls bore witness to an unspoken vow. In that moment, fear became a chain, one that bound him not to despair, but to her. Daniel sat in the empty hospital room, his body trembling with exhaustion as dawn light crept through blinds. The baby's breaths were steady, a rhythm that unsettled him. "I'm not built for this," he whispered, fingers digging into his scalp. Memories of his father's absence came rushing back, the slammed doors, the bitter fights, the silence of abandonment that still echoed in him. He had sworn never to repeat that cycle, yet here he was, faced with a child that bore his blood. Shame spread through him like poison. He stood, pacing the sterile floor, anger and fear boiling under his skin. The baby stirred, her whimper slicing the air. Daniel froze, chest tightening, feeling the weight of being seen by someone who did not understand, but would one day remember. He pressed his palm to the wall, whispering, "I can't fail her, but I don't know how to love her." The nurse returned briefly, leaving papers on the table, her face soft but firm. "She left this for you," she said, sliding an envelope across the surface. Daniel stared at it like a snake ready to strike. His chest rose and fell sharply as he reached for it. Inside, the handwriting was hers, messy but familiar, the ink smudged by tears. "You'll hate me for this," the letter began, and Daniel's throat tightened. The words blurred as he read about her fear, her secret, her desperate belief that he was unfit to know until it was too late. "She didn't trust me," he muttered, the betrayal cutting deeper than the revelation. He crushed the paper in his hands, then straightened it again, as if afraid of losing the last thread of her. The baby whimpered, and the sound tore through him, anchoring him to the letter's cruel weight. Daniel leaned back, letter shaking in his hand, the words echoing like fire in his skull. "You'll hate me." They seared him with both truth and prophecy. "I already do," he said, his voice low, broken. His reflection in the hospital window stared back at him, hollow-eyed, haunted, a stranger burdened with fatherhood he never asked for. He turned toward the child, her tiny hand stretching from the blanket. The gesture pierced him deeper than words. "She looks for me," he whispered, stunned by the realization. His heart throbbed with panic, yet the fragile sight tethered him like an anchor in storm water. Rage at her mother clashed with the pull of connection, a battle tearing him in two. For every step backward into fear, the child's small existence pulled him forward. His body shivered, not from cold but from being seen for the first time. The hallway outside stirred with faint voices, a world still moving while Daniel's had collapsed. He sat again, clutching the armrest as if it could keep him grounded. The letter lay across his lap like a wound that refused to close. "She abandoned me," he whispered, but the echo of his own childhood made the words hollow. He remembered standing alone at 12 years old, waiting for a father who never returned. Now, fate had thrown him into that same role, and the irony felt cruel. His chest heaved, shame pressing down like stone. The baby whimpered again, soft but relentless, and Daniel's eyes filled. He turned toward her, vision blurred by tears. "I don't know how to be what she needs," he confessed aloud, voice raw and breaking. Yet the air seemed to hold him in place, daring him to surrender or fight. The nurse peeked back in, her tone steady. "She's hungry. Will you try?" Daniel's stomach knotted, his throat closing. I can't," he said, but the nurse's silence pressed him harder than words. His hands shook as she guided him, placing the small bottle in his palm. He sat stiff, sweat gathering at his brow as the child stirred and latched on. For the first time her cries softened, replaced by the quiet rhythm of trust. Daniel's eyes burned as he watched her, the fragile rise and fall of her chest, the softness of her breath. He whispered, "She doesn't know I'm broken." A tear slipped down his cheek, falling onto his sleeve. In that fragile moment, Daniel's armor cracked, replaced not by strength but by surrender. He felt chained not by betrayal anymore, but by the silent pull of a child who demanded to be seen. Daniel stepped outside the hospital, the cold morning air biting his skin. He cradled the papers against his chest, the weight of guardianship already suffocating. His phone buzzed, his mother's voice sharp on the line. "You can't bring her here." His jaw clenched, heart sinking. "She's my daughter," he said, words trembling with defiance he barely felt. Silence followed, heavier than accusation, until she snapped, "You'll ruin yourself." The call ended, leaving only the hiss of wind. Daniel stared at the city beyond, its streets loud and indifferent. He felt like a stranger in his own bloodline, rejected before he had even begun. Shame twisted in his stomach, but the infant's cry from inside pulled him back. "Even family won't stand with me," he whispered. His reflection in the glass door looked fractured, a man caught between love and rejection, and neither side offered escape. Back inside, Daniel found his friend Marcus waiting, arms folded, face tight with judgment. Marcus, tall and broad, looked at him as if he were a stranger. "Man, you don't need this," Marcus said coldly. Daniel's breath caught, anger rising. "She's mine," Marcus scoffed, eyes narrowing. "She'll destroy you. Look at yourself, already broken." The words dug deeper than knives, echoing every insecurity Daniel fought to bury. He wanted to shout, to strike back, but fear clamped his throat. The baby stirred in her bassinet, and the sound silenced both men. Marcus shook his head, backing away. "Don't expect me to stick around." His footsteps echoed down the hallway, fading like betrayal. Daniel's fists clenched, veins bulging with rage he could not release. He muttered, "One by one they're all leaving, the walls closing tighter, the circle shrinking until it was only him and the child." Later, Daniel sat in a courthouse lobby, the walls gray and cold, the air thick with whispers. He felt exposed, eyes darting as strangers glanced his way. The clerk handed him documents, her tone clipped. "Paternity confirmed." His vision blurred. The words slammed like a gavel inside his skull. He said nothing, though his lips trembled. The truth was now law, carved into stone he could not break. People whispered nearby, their judgment dripping into his veins. "He's the father. Doesn't even look ready." Shame rose in his chest, choking him. Daniel forced his legs to move, sitting on a wooden bench, the papers crumpling in his hands. He muttered, "I didn't choose this," but the echo sounded hollow. The baby's image filled his mind again, her tiny fists demanding he carry the weight, even as the world waited for him to collapse. Night fell heavy as Daniel returned to his small apartment. Whoa! The walls were bare, shadows deep, silence crushing. He placed the infant on the bed, watching her eyes flutter open. "This is all I have," he whispered, his voice trembling. A knock rattled the door, his neighbor Mrs. Whitfield standing with folded arms. "People talk," she said sharply, her gaze slicing him open. "A child needs more than a broken man." Daniel clenched his fists, fury heating his skin. "She's mine," he said, but the words felt fragile against her scorn. She shook her head, muttering under her breath as she walked away. The door closed, and Daniel pressed his forehead against it, every breath heavier than the last. Alone again, he turned to the baby. "They all see weakness," he said softly, "but I can't let them see me fall." The infant's quiet sigh answered like fragile defiance. Hours passed, Daniel rocking the baby in his arms as moonlight filtered through cracked blinds. His body ached, his mind frayed, but her presence bound him tighter than chains. "I can't do this," he whispered, yet his arms held her closer. Each cry felt like judgment, each silence like fragile mercy. He thought of his father again, the abandonment that carved him hollow. "I won't be him," Daniel swore, though the fear of failure clung like smoke. The city outside roared, indifferent, but inside this small room, his world narrowed to a fragile heartbeat against his chest. He pressed his cheek to her head, whispering, "If I fall, you'll fall too." Tears slipped down his face, silent and raw. The conflict consumed him. Every step toward love was also a step toward ruin. Yet the child's breath steadied him, pulling him back from collapse. The knock on the door came sharp, unexpected. Daniel opened it to find Claire, his ex-girlfriend's sister, her face pale and tense. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past him. The baby stirred at the sound of her voice. Claire's eyes fell on the child, and for a moment grief flickered across her face. Daniel snapped, "Why are you here?" Her hands shook as she unfolded a crumpled letter, her voice breaking. "She lied to you, Daniel. The truth is worse." His heart stopped, every muscle rigid. Claire whispered, "That child, she's not who you think she is." The words slashed through the air, leaving him breathless. His knees weakened, the ground tilting beneath him. The child cried, her fragile wail cutting through their silence, demanding the truth. No one wanted to speak aloud. Daniel slammed the door shut, his voice ragged. "Say it?" Claire's eyes filled with tears, her hands gripping the letter like it might vanish. "She left because the father wasn't you." The words pierced deeper than betrayal. His chest heaved, fury twisting into disbelief. "You're lying," Daniel hissed, veins pulsing at his temples. Claire's voice cracked as she added, "It was my brother. She couldn't face you with that truth." The world shattered in a single breath. His body swayed, vision swimming. The child's small form in the bassinet blurred through his tears. Daniel whispered, "No." His mind raced, replaying every moment, every lie, every silence. The truth was jagged glass tearing through his chest. The air grew heavy, silence pressing like a coffin, until the baby's cry dragged them both back into unbearable reality. Daniel staggered back, collapsing into a chair, his breath ragged. "It can't be true," he muttered, but his voice cracked under its own weight. Claire sat across from him, guilt carved deep into her face. "She wanted to protect you, Daniel. She thought the truth would destroy you." He laughed bitterly, the sound jagged. "It just did." His hands dug into his knees, shaking violently. Claire whispered, "He doesn't even know. She carried this alone." The words hit harder, betrayal spreading like wildfire in his chest. He looked at the baby, the fragile innocence chained to secrets darker than he imagined. "She's still mine," Daniel said, though his voice shook like breaking glass. His eyes locked on the infant, defiant even as tears streaked his cheeks. For the first time, his fear and rage fused into something sharper, a vow not to let go. The night stretched heavy, silence broken only by the baby's soft cries. Daniel stood by the window, moonlight spilling across his face. His voice was low, cracked. "Everything I believed, gone." Claire stepped closer, her eyes shimmering with regret. "You don't have to carry this alone." He turned sharply, fire in his eyes. "Don't you dare pity me." The room pulsed with tension, every breath jagged. Claire's lips trembled as she whispered, "She begged me to tell you, but I couldn't. I thought lies would hurt less." Daniel slammed his fist against the wall, plaster cracking under his hand. "Lies hurt more," he spat, his voice raw. The baby's cry rose louder, demanding attention. Daniel froze, chest heaving, torn between rage and helplessness. Claire reached toward the child, but he stepped forward, blocking her path, eyes burning with unspoken claim. Daniel sank to his knees beside the bassinet, his voice trembling as he whispered, "No matter the blood, she's mine." His tears dripped onto the blanket, his body shaking with fury and grief. Claire stood frozen, her silence an admission of guilt and sorrow. The baby's cries softened, her tiny hand brushing Daniel's arm as though anchoring him to the moment. His chest cracked open, every scar exposed. "She chained me with lies, but this child, she chains me with truth," he muttered, voice raw. His body trembled, but his hands steadied as he reached for her. Claire's breath hitched, her face pale with regret. Daniel lifted the baby gently, pressing his cheek to hers. "I'll never let her go," he whispered, defiance burning through his despair. In that vow, betrayal transformed into resolve, though the weight of truth crushed him still. The courtroom was packed, whispers slicing through the air like blades. Daniel sat at the front, baby in his arms, his jaw tight with defiance. The judge's gavel struck, commanding silence. Across the room, Claire's brother entered, his eyes dark, his presence heavy with shame. Daniel's breath caught as truth stood before him in flesh, not words. His fists clenched, rage and betrayal fusing into fire. The lawyer's voice boomed, "This case will decide guardianship." Daniel muttered. "Over my dead body." Every muscle in him trembled, not with fear, but with fury sharpened by loss. The baby whimpered softly, her innocence louder than the accusations that filled the air. He stood, his voice breaking yet powerful. "She is mine. Blood or not, she is mine." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief, the weight of his vow echoing in every corner of the room. Daniel's voice rose, shaking the chamber. "You left her, and you dare stand here now?" His words struck like thunder, but Claire's brother smirked coldly, his silence heavier than any insult. Daniel's chest burned as he slammed his hand on the table. "You abandoned her, just like my father abandoned me." His cry cracked open his scars, exposing them to strangers who gasped at his rawness. The judge demanded order, but Daniel's fury spilled unchecked. Tears blurred his vision, his throat raw, his voice shaking yet unrelenting. "This child deserves more than lies and cowardice." The baby stirred, her small cry piercing the air like a verdict of her own. Daniel's heart pounded as silence returned, every gaze burning into him. For once, he did not shrink. He stood taller, his wounds no longer hidden, but wielded like a sword against betrayal. The lawyer for Claire's brother rose, voice calm yet venomous. "Mr. Daniels, you admit the child isn't biologically yours?" The question sliced deep, each word a deliberate wound. Daniel's lips trembled, but he raised his chin. "She is mine in every way that matters." Murmurs filled the gallery, judgment dripping from strangers' eyes. Daniel gripped the child closer, shielding her as though the words themselves could harm her. His pulse thundered, yet his voice steadied. "Blood doesn't define love. Choice does, and I choose her." The judge's gaze lingered, unreadable, as silence stretched taut across the chamber. Daniel's knees felt weak, yet he stood like stone, unwilling to bend. Every scar, every rejection had led to this moment, and he refused to let her go. The air trembled with the weight of his defiance, his vow louder than law itself. Claire's brother finally spoke, his voice sharp, cutting. "She isn't yours. She never was." The words hit Daniel like blades, but he did not falter. His chest heaved, his throat raw. "She may carry your blood, but she carries my soul." Gasps rippled through the room, the tension suffocating. Claire's brother's jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed unease. Daniel stepped forward, fire blazing in his veins. "You will not erase me. You will not erase her." His words cracked like thunder, each syllable striking the chamber walls. The baby let out a soft sigh, as if tethering him to his vow. The judge's gavel struck again, echoing like gunfire. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of Daniel's ragged breath. In that silence, his scars became his armor, and his brokenness became his power. He would not surrender. The climax thundered through Daniel's body as he raised the child high, his voice breaking. "She will know me. She will know who stood when others ran." His cry rang across the chamber, raw, defiant, unforgettable. Claire covered her mouth, tears spilling as the truth struck her harder than law ever could. The gallery leaned forward, every heart captive to the storm unraveling. The judge's gavel struck again, but Daniel's vow drowned it out. His body shook, tears and sweat mingling, yet his arms never wavered. The baby's eyes opened, wide and unknowing, as though witnessing the war fought over her existence. Daniel's voice fell to a whisper, choked but resolute. "No matter what, she will never be abandoned." The room fell still, silence aching, every soul bound by his defiance. In that vow, Daniel shattered and rebuilt himself all at once. The courtroom emptied, leaving Daniel in the silence of aftermath. He sat slumped on the bench, the baby asleep in his arms, her tiny breaths steady against his chest. His body trembled with exhaustion, his spirit bruised by the storm he had just endured. Claire lingered at the back, her face pale, guilt carved deep into her features. Daniel whispered, "I've lost everything, but I still have her." His words were soft, cracked, but filled with fragile resolve. Claire stepped forward, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." Daniel shook his head, eyes closed. "You already did." The gavel's echo still haunted him, yet the child's warmth pressed him back into the present. He looked down at her fragile face, tears burning his eyes. "No matter what, I choose her," he said, his voice barely audible, yet unshakably certain. Later, Daniel carried the baby through the city streets, neon lights flickering against the wet pavement. Rain drizzled lightly, soaking his shirt, but he held her close, shielding her from the storm. His reflection shimmered in puddles, fractured yet unbroken. People passed, their eyes filled with judgment, whispers following him like shadows. His chest tightened, shame gnawing at him, but each small breath from the child steadied his steps. "The world will see weakness," he murmured, "but you'll only see me." The baby stirred, her soft sigh piercing the noise of traffic. His eyes burned as he tightened his hold. For the first time, he did not feel like he was running. He felt anchored, grounded, bound not by chains of betrayal, but by a fragile purpose that refused to let him go. Every step became a vow etched into the night. Back in his apartment, silence pressed in, broken only by the baby's soft breaths. Daniel sat at the edge of the bed, his head bowed, tears streaking his face. The letter from her mother lay torn on the table, words bleeding into memory. He whispered, "She left me broken, but you make me whole." His voice cracked, trembling as he brushed the baby's small hand with his fingertip. The fragile touch sent a shiver through him, a reminder of life's cruel fragility and fierce beauty. His chest swelled with both pain and strange hope. He knew scars would never fade, betrayal never erased, yet the child gave his ruin meaning. He whispered again, "I will not walk away." The lamp's glow wrapped them in fragile warmth, as though the world outside had no power to intrude on this vow. Claire returned days later, her face marked by sleepless nights. She stood at the doorway, voice low. "She deserves more than either of us gave her." Daniel met her eyes, rage tempered by exhaustion. "I gave her everything I had." Claire's lips trembled as she whispered, "And that's why she's better with you." Silence hung heavy, the unspoken wounds between them bleeding into the air. Daniel turned toward the baby, asleep in the bassinet, her small chest rising and falling with fragile certainty. He muttered, "Then this ends with me." Claire's tears spilled, regret flooding her gaze. She stepped back into the hallway, vanishing like a ghost into shadow. Daniel closed the door softly, leaning against it, his chest heaving. For the first time, he felt the faintest release. Not forgiveness, but the fragile beginning of peace. That night, Daniel sat by the window, the city glowing faintly beyond cracked blinds. The baby slept in his arms, her warmth anchoring him in silence. He whispered, "You will know me, even if the world forgets me." His words trembled with both fear and hope. Tears slipped quietly, not of despair, but of fragile acceptance. He pressed his cheek to her head, breathing in her scent, his chest rising steady for the first time in months. The scars of betrayal still cut deep, but love bled through, stronger than grief. His voice fell to a vow, soft but unbreakable. "I choose you always." The night carried his words like prayer, settling into stillness. The city roared outside, indifferent, but within the small room, a fragile peace took root. Daniel closed his eyes, no longer running, but standing where he was meant to stand. The night was still, broken only by the ticking clock on Daniel's wall. He sat at the kitchen table, the baby cradled in his arms, her eyes wide and searching. His voice cracked as he whispered, "They'll try to take you from me." The weight of betrayal, the courtroom, the lies, they pressed against his ribs, threatening to crush him. Yet, the child's fragile hand rested on his chest, grounding him in defiance. He clenched his jaw, staring into the darkened room as though daring the shadows themselves to fight him. "You will know who I am," he swore, each word trembling but unbreakable. His tears fell freely, streaking his cheeks, but he did not hide them. Love had carved itself into his scars, and in that raw wound he found strength. He pressed his lips to her forehead, whispering a vow only she would ever hear. Rain lashed against the window, the storm outside echoing the war inside him. Daniel rocked slowly, the baby tucked in his arms, her breath a fragile rhythm against the chaos. "I don't care what they say," he whispered, his voice rough, raw. The memory of his father's absence clawed at him, yet he refused to let the ghost dictate his fate. "I am not him," he said, fire igniting in his chest. The baby stirred, her tiny whimper cutting through the roar of thunder, and Daniel held her tighter, his body trembling with both fear and conviction. Every beat of his heart thudded like a hammer striking iron, shaping his vow. He glanced at the cracked window pane, his reflection fractured but standing. "Hide every shadow if I must," he swore, his voice rising above the storm's howl, a promise carved in fire. Morning light crept into the room, soft and golden, but Daniel's eyes were red with sleeplessness. He sat on the edge of his bed, baby asleep in his arms, the quiet a fragile reprieve. He whispered, "They'll never see me as enough." His voice trembled, burdened by doubt, yet he could not look away from her. Her small chest rose and fell, steady and unshaken, as though mocking the chaos that consumed him. His hands shook, but he steadied them, brushing her cheek gently. "But you will," he said, his words fragile as glass yet strong as steel. The weight of his scars remained, but love pressed against them, carving space for something new. He leaned back, tears glistening in the pale sunlight, and closed his eyes. "I will break before I let you break," he swore, his voice a whisper lost to the dawn. Later that day, Daniel stood in the small park near his apartment, the city sprawling beyond. He held the baby close, her eyes fluttering against the breeze. Whispers followed him, neighbors, strangers, their gazes sharp, their voices low. Shame prickled his skin, but he stood taller, his jaw set. "Judge me," he muttered, "but she will never feel what I felt." His voice cracked, trembling but strong. He remembered the cold nights waiting for a father who never came. He swore no such nights would haunt her. The world could scorn him, strip him, but it could not erase him from her story. He kissed her forehead, closing his eyes against the sting of tears. "You'll never wait for me in vain," he whispered. In that vow, the chain of abandonment shattered, leaving only a father and a child bound by fragile defiance. Night returned, heavy and silent. Daniel sat by the window, the baby asleep in his arms, her soft breath steady as the world outside roared with indifference. His eyes glistened with tears, but his voice was steady, raw. "They tried to take you, but they never will." His words fell into silence, a vow echoing in the quiet. He kissed her forehead, whispering softer, "You will always know me." His body shook, every scar pressing against his chest, but love burned through, stronger than the wounds. The final tear slipped down, and he let it fall without shame. He looked at her, the fragile truth of his existence, and whispered the line that would define him. "If the world forgets me, you never will." Silence followed, heavy, unbroken, unforgettable. His vow lingered in the air, eternal, unshakable, binding father and child forever.